despite the fact that I've already spoiled the ending by mentioning this will likely be an operating lease. Let's still work through the classification step as we would in practice. Before we do so though, let's just quickly walk through the rest of the lease so we know what we're dealing with. There isn't anything here that is too important from an ASC 842 perspective, though we do have to think about item 9 here briefly. This states that we'll pay utility costs for the premises. This is clearly not a lease component, which raises the question, should we treat them just as we'll treat the CAM charges in item 7? And the answer is not exactly. The important distinction here is whether the utilities are a lessor-provided service. The CAM charges are handled and billed to us by the lessor. But if the utilities are separately metered, and we pay the utility company directly, then these are not even a non-lease component that will result in variable lease costs under ASC 842. They would not be a payment between lessee and lessor, so ASC 842 does not apply at all. We'd simply treat them as any other operating expense. That could change though if they're not separately metered, and the lessor pays the utility company and then in turn bills us. In that case, the lessor is providing the utility service and billing us for it, and we treat it as a non-lease component that we've elected to combine with the lease component, just as we did the CAM charges. But let's assume for our purposes these are separately metered and we pay the utility company directly. So in our case, we'll ignore these as they fall completely outside the scope of ASC 842. Then after that, there is really nothing of importance as far as the accounting is concerned. The lease lays out potential late charges, discusses the insurance we're required to have, but again, this is between us and an insurance company, so nothing to do with ASC 842. Then just some standard language about permitted use, what happens if either party defaults, and the note that this is the complete and only agreement between the parties. Okay, now that we understand the entire lease, let's step back and classify it. So first, does the lease transfer ownership of the underlying asset before the end of the lease term? And the answer here is very simple. It does not. It also does not contain a purchase option we are reasonably certain to exercise. So that's 2 out of 5 criteria eliminated immediately. The third criterion asks whether the lease term is a major part of the remaining economic life of the underlying asset. And this leads to the most interesting part of the analysis, determining our actual lease term. We have an initial 36-month term with an option to extend for an additional 24 months at our discretion. So we need to assess whether we are reasonably certain to exercise that renewal. As you'll recall, ASC 842 does provide some guidance here. We need to consider contract-based, asset-based, market-based, and entity-based factors in our assessment. So let's look at each. Contractually, we can evaluate the renewal rent against the base contract. During the initial term, rent rises from $3,800 to $4,010, an increase of roughly 2.7% annually. Over the full 5 years, rent goes from $3,800 to $4,220, also about 2.7% annually. So when we analyze the rent during the renewal period, it's not overly strong evidence in either direction. If the rent increase were extremely small, that might suggest it's below market and we'd likely renew. If it were unusually high, we might expect to move out. Here we're somewhere in the middle, so let's move on to asset-based factors. Here we'd consider things like leasehold improvements that would have value to us when the option becomes exercisable. We'll almost certainly customize this office space to meet our needs. Leasehold improvements make it more likely we'll want to stay, so let's mark this as leaning slightly toward exercising the renewal option. Market-based factors include the cost of terminating the lease and securing a new space. If we leave and still want an Austin office, We'll face costs to find new space and relocate. These can be significant business disruptions, so this again leans towards exercising the renewal option. Finally, entity-based factors include how important this Austin office is to our operations. If we only needed space for a short-term project, that would argue against renewal. But if our plan is to maintain a long-term Austin presence and the office supports our business growth, that suggests we're likely to extend. So there's certainly a lot of judgment involved, but based on these factors, we could support a conclusion that we are reasonably certain to exercise the renewal option. So we'll use a 5-year term, the initial 36 months plus the 24-month renewal. Now for office leases, this usually doesn't change much in the classification test. Whether 36 or 60 months, it's unlikely to cover 75% of the remaining useful life of a long-lived asset like an office building. We'll assume the building's useful life extends far beyond 7 more years, so we do not meet the economic life criterion. Next is the fair value test. Whether the present value of the lease payments equals or exceeds 90% of the fair value of the underlying asset. We won't repeat the entire discount rate and fair value comparison like we did with the equipment lease, but the logic is the same. And given the long useful life of an office building and typical market economics, it's highly unlikely our 5 years of payments would come anywhere close to 90% of the real estate's fair value. And that brings us to the final criterion, whether the asset is so specialized that it has no alternative use to the lessor at the end of the lease term. This one is simple, it's just an office suite. Unless this were an extremely specialized facility, the lessor can clearly release it to others, so we don't meet this criterion either. So we haven't met any of the 5 criteria. We only need to meet one for a finance lease classification, but we didn't meet any. And thus, to the surprise of nobody at this point, we'll classify our Austin office space as an operating lease. That brings us through step 3 in accounting for leases as a lessee. Now we're ready for step 4, initial measurement. In the next episode, we'll jump back into the lease tracking workbook and begin setting up our new lease.